The ring hit the dirt with a soft thud, barely stirring the dust that clung to the cracked earth of the Navarro ranch yard. Alejo Navarro stood over it, arms rigid at his sides, jaw locked tight as the New Mexico sun scorched his shoulders through the linen of his shirt. He didn't blink, didn't move. Just stared at the small gold band lying in the soil, his mother's wedding ring, her most sacred thing, until it became nothing but another forgotten thing on cursed land. 15 years. 15 years of women smiling just a second too wide when they saw the size of his property, of polite glances that always drifted past his face to the house behind him, to the cattle, to the fences that ran clean out to the horizon. They never asked about his scars, only his acreage. "You're going to regret that," came a voice behind him, low and easy. Alejo didn't turn. He didn't have to. He knew the voice the way a man knows his own blood. "Stay out of it, Mateo." His brother's boots scuffed the dirt as he walked up beside him. Younger by 4 years, but always the louder one, Mateo crouched and picked up the ring. He brushed the dirt away with his thumb like it was something living. "Mama would tan your hide if she saw you treatin' her ring like this." "Mama's dead." "Don't mean she ain't watching." Alejo finally turned to him. Mateo had inherited their father's wide shoulders and their mother's laugh lines. His eyes still crinkled with light. Alejo's had turned to steel long ago. "Give it back, Alejo said. Mateo shook his head. "Not today. Not when you're acting like a damn fool." Alejo reached for the ring, but Mateo slipped it into his vest pocket. "You toss this thing every few years, like it's gonna spit out your answers. Then you stare at the dirt and wonder why nothing changes. You done grieving or just tired of trying?" Alejo's hands clenched at his sides. "What happened this time? Let me guess." Mateo snapped his fingers. "The banker's daughter. She asked me how many acres I ran," Alejo muttered. First thing out of her mouth, she didn't even sit down. Mateo let out a sharp breath through his nose. So maybe she was curious. She was calculating. There's a difference. He turned toward the barn, his boots crunching over dry grass. "I've got work. Some of us still earn what we own. And some of us don't hide behind barns every time a woman blinks too long." Alejo didn't answer. He'd learned years ago that Mateo's words were like summer storms, loud and fast and full of flash, but they always passed. If you just stayed still long enough, the silence always won. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and horse sweat wrapped around him like a second skin. This he understood. Horses didn't pretend. They didn't charm or calculate. They either trusted you or they didn't. Midnight, his black stallion nudged the stall gate as Alejo passed, soft as a question. "At least you're honest," Alejo murmured, pulling a withered apple from his back pocket. "Food and freedom. That's all you ask." The stallion took the offering and chomped down, calm and content. A shadow moved in the doorway. "Señor Navarro," said a voice, hesitant. Lorenzo Chavez, his foreman, stood there with his hat in his hands. "Stagecoach accident up at Miller's Crossing. Sheriff Rivera's asking for help clearing the wreck." Alejo rubbed at the back of his neck. "Anyone hurt? Don't know. Some folks say blood. Some say it's nothing but a broken wheel. Sheriff says he needs men and wagons." Alejo looked down at his hands, work-worn and dusted with hay. He didn't want to go. Town meant questions. Eyes, curious women and nosy widows. It meant old ladies asking when he was going to give them grandbabies. Meant hearing about the new school teacher from Las Cruces, sweet girl, would make a man a lovely wife. He was tired of lovely wives. Still, duty didn't ask what you were tired of. "Tell Rosa to ready my horse." "Yes, patron." The ride to Miller's Crossing took half an hour under a sky that burned without apology. The creek by the road had run dry weeks ago, leaving nothing but a rust-colored vein of cracked stone. As Alejo crested the ridge, he saw the wreck, a stagecoach on its side like a dead mule, one wheel spinning useless in the air. Dust coated everything. Men were shouting, tugging at luggage, trying to calm spooked horses. But it wasn't the coach that caught his eye. It was the woman. She stood with her back to the sunlight, one hand pressed tight to a bloodied sleeve, the other pointing at the driver. She was arguing with Sheriff Rivera, her voice sharp and unrelenting even from across the hill. "I told you I don't need a doctor," she said. "But that man might. So either help me get my trunk or get out of my way." "You're bleeding," the sheriff countered. "I'm also a doctor's daughter. I know the difference between a scratch and a threat." Alejo stopped his horse at the edge of the scene. Her voice carried like a branding iron, clean, firm, unapologetic. Her dress was torn at the hem, dusty, and stuck to her legs with sweat. Dark hair had come loose from whatever pins had tried to hold it back. Her arm shook just slightly, but her spine stood straight, defiant. No, not defiant. Hiding. He'd seen that look before in a mirror once, long ago. She was terrified, and she didn't want anyone to know it. "The lady asked for her trunk," Alejo said. Rivera turned, startled. "Navarro! Didn't see you ride up." The trunk, brown leather, brass corners, the woman said, eyes locked on Alejo now. Initials CM. Alejo nodded and climbed down. "I'll get it." Behind the wreck, he found the trunk wedged beneath a dented hat box and a frayed valise. It was heavier than it looked. He carried it to her anyway, ignoring the heat seeping through the leather into his palms. When he returned, she was on her knees beside the injured driver, unwrapping a blood-stained bandage with a practiced hand. "Not as bad as it looks," she murmured. "Head wounds always bleed more." Alejo placed the trunk beside her. She glanced up, eyes the color of burnt honey, and for the briefest moment, her mask cracked. Just a flicker. "Thank you. You're welcome." As he stepped back, she opened the trunk and began pulling out glass bottles and cloth wraps, metal tools and folded linen. She worked quickly, without hesitation. Clara Montoya had arrived in Lincoln County, New Mexico, and nothing would ever be the same. Far-off storm clouds rolled over the distant peaks, thick with the kind of tension that didn't break until something snapped. Alejo narrowed his eyes. Something was coming, and it was already here. The trunk hit the ground with a soft thump, its brass corners glinting under the sun as dust puffed around it. Clara crouched over the driver with practiced calm, her fingers moving fast, precise. The old man winced as she tied the bandage, but he didn't pull away. Alejo stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching her work with the unblinking stillness of a hunting hawk. She hadn't looked up since thanking him. Not once. Not when the sheriff tried again to convince her to sit. Not when a ranch hand nearby mumbled about uppity women. Not even when she tore off the bloody sleeve of her dress, with her teeth exposing the raw, jagged gash that snaked along her forearm. "You really are a doctor's daughter," Alejo said quietly, as she rummaged through the trunk again. "Was." Her voice was soft, but the edge remained. "He died 6 months ago. I'm sorry. So am I." She moved to the man with the twisted ankle next her skirt, dragging in the dirt as she knelt again. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from nerves fatigue, maybe, or something deeper. Fear disguised as efficiency. Alejo took a slow step forward. "You're bleeding." "I'm aware. It's still bleeding." She didn't look up. "It'll stop, with what your other arm's not long enough to reach." That made her pause. Her hands stilled. She finally lifted her eyes to his sharpened amber glass ringed with something ancient and tired. For a breath, Alejo saw suspicion, then calculation, then something else. Something bruised curled tight in her chest like a secret. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "I'm not expecting anything in return. You helped my men. Let me return the favor." "You don't even know my name," she said. Alejo knelt. "Don't need to see you're bleeding." She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if there was any humor left in her. Slowly she extended her arm. The fabric was soaked through. Beneath it, the wound looked worse than he expected, long, angry, and deep enough to scar. He opened her trunk, silently impressed at the order inside. Cotton rolls, iron tools, alcohol. No wasted space. She had the hands of someone who'd been doing this for a long time. He cleaned the cut with water from his canteen, then wrapped the bandage with steady fingers. "Clara Montoya," she said after a long silence. "Most people call me Clara. Alejo Navarro." She gave a small nod. "I know who you are." His eyes flicked to hers. "How the sheriff called you Navarro. You're not dressed like anyone's deputy. You showed up with your own horse and didn't ask for orders. That makes you the man with the land, the house, the stallion. You don't wear soft boots. Your hands are calloused. You're not a banker." She looked at him again this time, not flinching. "Which means you work what you own. That makes you dangerous, Mr. Navarro." Alejo paused as he finished tying the bandage. Why? Because men who work what they own tend to protect it. A gust of dry wind swept across the crossing, stirring the fine dirt into brief spirals around their boots. Clara stood and brushed off her skirt with one hand, jaw clenched against the pain. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Silver City." "For what work?" "Cooking, cleaning, bookkeeping, whatever's available. I have medical training, though no papers. I'm not afraid of labor." Alejo tilted his head. "What you are is desperate," she flinched. Her spine stiffened like a steel rod being forged in fire. When she looked at him again, the warmth in her face had vanished. "I prefer determined. Desperate people make dangerous decisions, and judgmental people make poor first impressions." The words landed between them like a slap. Alejo blinked, caught off guard. People in Lincoln County didn't talk to him like that. Most didn't talk to him at all. He studied her face, streaked with dirt and blood. Her dress ruined her voice like cut glass. She was half broken, yes, but she was standing, holding the world off with a look. "You're right," he said. "That was out of line. I apologize." She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You apologize, I'm capable of admitting when I'm wrong," she muttered under her breath. "That's rare in a man." "So I've been told." Before she could respond, Sheriff Rivera returned, hat in hand. "Señorita Montoya, the stage will be held until tomorrow. We've got to haul it back upright, and the wheels cracked near through. There's a room at Doña Rosa Vélez's boarding house." Clara's expression tightened. "I don't have money for a room." Alejo stepped forward before she could refuse again. "I'll cover it." She looked at him sharply. "I didn't ask for charity. It's not charity. Call it payment for services rendered. I don't charge for medical care." "Then call it a loan." Her eyes narrowed, with interest. He raised a brow. "No interest. Interest or nothing." He almost smiled. "You're the most stubborn woman I've met." "Good. Then we understand each other." She turned and walked toward the salvaged luggage, favoring her arm but not asking for help. She refused 2 offers from nearby men, only relenting when the driver limped over and took the trunk's other handle. Alejo watched her. A strange pressure filled his chest, something like admiration, something like warning. He should have left. Walked away, returned to the ranch, the horses, the silence. Instead, he rode alongside her wagon all the way into town. The sun dipped behind the peaks as they reached the edge of Silver City. The sky flamed orange and indigo, casting long shadows over the buildings. They arrived at Doña Rosa's just after sundown. The old woman stood in the doorway with a kerosene lamp, watching them approach with narrowed eyes. Alejo handed her 2 weeks' worth of coins, room and board. Don't let her pay you back. She'll try, Rosa said flatly. She will. You never did this for anyone before. Don't make more of it than it is. Wouldn't dream of it. Clara had already disappeared inside, carrying her trunk one-handed up the narrow staircase. Alejo stood in the parlor for a long moment, fists clenched. She's running, Rosa said gently. Alejo didn't look at her. How do you know? I've seen it before, in the way she moves, the way she doesn't sleep. Saw a man asking for her in Holbrook, Eastern accent, fine clothes. Didn't look like he took no for an answer. His jaw locked. If anyone comes asking, he said, you don't know a thing. I don't know nothing about nobody, Rosa said with a grim smile. Same as always. Alejo nodded once and turned to leave. She's not yours to save, Rosa called after him. He didn't answer. Just walked out into the night where the wind picked up the dust of Lincoln County and carried it toward the dark. Far behind him, in a lamplit room upstairs, Clara Montoya lay awake, the ring from Alejo Navarro burning cold in her mind. Understood. Here's Chapter 3, continuing the dramatic and emotional flow, fully aligned with the outline. You can stay till your wounds heal, but don't go mistaking this for a welcome. The fire cracked in the hearth, casting flickers of gold over the worn wood floors of the ranch house. Mariah sat stiffly in the armchair, her bandaged legs stretched out and resting on a pillow. Her hands, scratched and raw, gripped the edge of the blanket draped over her lap. Across from her, Eli stood with his arms crossed, shoulders tight, like the air between them had hardened into glass. He hadn't said much since hauling her out of that gully and loading her onto his horse. He hadn't asked her name or where she came from or how the blood on her face got there. He just handed her water, patched her leg with practiced silent care, and brought her here to this cabin, hidden behind a stretch of cottonwoods, where the wind couldn't find them so easily. But now he was talking, and his words were colder than the winter coming. Mariah swallowed. I didn't ask to stay. No, but you can't ride out either. You can't walk. Not yet. He looked away, jaw-flexing eyes staring past her out the window toward the hills that had kept him company for a decade. There was a tightness in his voice, like letting her sit in this room cost him something he couldn't name. Why are you angry? She asked quietly. I'm not angry, he replied too quickly. I just don't want trouble. I'm not trouble. Everyone says that, until they bring it to your front door. Mariah leaned forward, wincing as pain flared in her thigh. I'm not like them. Whoever they were. I've heard that too. Silence spun between them. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the window panes like fingers searching for a way in. Inside, the only sound was the low hiss of the fire and the distant stomp of a horse shifting in the barn. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. You'll find spare clothes in the trunk by the bed. Eat. Rest. We'll figure something out after. Then he was gone, boots thudding down the porch steps and vanishing into the dark. Mariah exhaled tension, leaving her body in slow ripples. She looked around the cabin. It was simple, sparse, but not unloved. Every corner held the quiet discipline of a man who lived with ghosts. A rifle cleaned and mounted with care. A single rocking chair that faced the fire. An old photograph turned face down on the shelf. She didn't dare touch it. She reached for the soup cooling on the table instead, lifting the spoon with hands that trembled. It was the first warm thing she'd tasted in days, and with every swallow she felt some small part of herself unknot. But the peace was fleeting. She didn't know how long she had before Samuel found her. He always found her. And this time he'd be more careful. He'd seen the fire in her when she ran. He wouldn't underestimate her again. She needed a plan. That night, Mariah didn't sleep. The fire died low. The woods outside moaned, but her eyes stayed open, locked on the ceiling beams above. She counted every creak, every whisper of wind, every heartbeat that reminded her she was still alive. By dawn, her mind had settled into something sharp and clear. She would earn her place here, just long enough to get strong again, just long enough to slip away before Samuel circled back. But when morning came, it was clear that Eli had other ideas. He was already chopping wood when she hobbled out the door, leaning on a rough branch she'd found beside the barn. Shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat at his brow. Despite the chill, he didn't look surprised to see her. But he didn't smile either. "You shouldn't be up," he said, splitting a log with one clean strike. "I can't sit inside all day," she replied. "You ain't healed. I'm not made of glass." He gave her a glance, then one eyebrow slightly raised. "That's so." She stepped forward, wincing but steady. "Let me help. I can work. I know how." He stared at her a beat too long. "Then fine. Muck stalls. If you're up for that." She didn't flinch. "Show me where." It wasn't pride that pushed her, it was survival. She knew what happened to weak things. Samuel made sure of that. And if Eli Thornton saw her as weak, he'd send her back into the world with no protection and no second thought. So she worked. That day she shoveled stalls, brushed down the horses, carried water buckets even when her wound burned like fire. She didn't complain, not once. By dusk she nearly collapsed onto the porch steps. Eli walked past her with a bucket of oats, but this time he paused. "You trying to prove something?" he asked. She met his gaze. "That I'm not a burden." He stood there a long moment, then nodded once. "You're not." It was the first time his voice had softened. The next day she woke to find warm coffee on the table and a folded flannel shirt waiting by the fire. The next, he showed her how to bridle a stubborn colt named Dusty. By the end of the week, they moved around each other without needing words. He handed her tools without asking. She fetched things he hadn't yet realized he needed. But one evening, while she was tending to Dusty's hoof, the wind shifted. And with it came a smell she recognized instantly, old tobacco, cinnamon oil, and leather. Her breath caught. She turned, heart thudding. Nothing. Just the woods. The wind. The distant cry of a hawk. But she knew better. Samuel had been near, watching. The cold that settled in her chest didn't come from the wind this time. That night she didn't eat, didn't speak. Eli noticed. "Something wrong?" he asked from the doorway, the fire casting shadows across his face. She hesitated. "Then I think he's found me." His eyes narrowed. Mariah didn't blink. "The man I ran from. He's close." Eli stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "You want to tell me what he did?" She stared at the flames. "He tried to own me, like a horse, like a piece of land." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it was different. Tighter. "Charged. He comes here," Eli said low. "He won't leave walking." Mariah looked up, and for the first time she believed him. But Samuel was not the kind of man to knock on doors. He was the kind to light them on fire. Under the pale hush of morning, the ranch felt suspended in time, a still canvas soaked in blue shadows and silver frost. The kettle on the stove rattled softly as Ransom pressed his palm flat against the windowsill, watching the barn through the glass, unmoving but alert. He could still hear the girl's scream from days ago. It echoed inside him, louder than any prairie wind. "Don't leave me out here," she had cried that first night, blood matting her hair, shivering and small as a breath in the doorway. Now she sat curled on the floor beside the stove, swaddled in one of his old quilts, her hands clutched around a chipped mug of broth. Her name was Tessa. She hadn't said much beyond that. But there were bruises on her that spoke volumes, and something in her eyes, like the sky before a thunderstorm, told him there was more behind her silence than just fear. "You always turn away women, but you let her stay." Why Sheriff Nolan had asked him that morning when he stopped by with feed news and subtle judgment. Ransom hadn't answered. He just handed over the saddle ledger and watched Nolan ride off, his words lingering like wood smoke. He didn't have a reason, not one he could explain without sounding like a fool. She hadn't begged. She hadn't flirted. She had simply looked him in the eye and said, "I need help." And something in that broke something in him. The girl stirred beside the stove. Ransom turned just as she tried to stand and stumbled into the table. The mug slipped from her grip and shattered. "I'm sorry," she whispered, backing into the corner like a spooked colt. "It's a mug," he said quietly, crossing the room and kneeling to pick up the shards. "You're all right." But she wasn't. He could see it, her breath coming fast, shoulders, trembling eyes, darting like she was expecting a blow. He didn't move closer. Instead, he scooped up the last piece and dropped it in the bin, then stood. "You're safe here." That sentence shouldn't have needed saying, but he saw how it steadied her just a flicker before she wrapped the quilt tighter and turned back to the fire. Later, out in the barn, he found Coy brushing down the horses, his dark brows knit into a knot. Coy had a way of noticing things Ransom didn't speak aloud. "You're not just keeping her warm, are you?" Coy asked without looking up. "I ain't touching her if that's what you mean." "I know that." Coy met his eyes. "But this ain't just a roof and soup, Ransom. You're getting drawn in. She's scared, sure. But broken people break things too." Ransom's jaw tightened. "I ain't expecting anything from her. Maybe not yet. But she's not some stray dog. Whatever she ran from, it ain't done chasing her." They stood in silence as the horses shifted in their stalls, the smell of hay and winter thick in the air. "She has a right to rest," Ransom said at last. Coy gave a slow nod. "Just make sure you ain't letting your guilt dress up like mercy." Back inside, he found Tessa still by the fire, but her gaze was fixed on the window now. Her fingers twitched at the edge of the blanket. "You were a soldier," she said suddenly. Ransom paused. "That obvious?" She pointed to the coat hung on the peg. "The patch, and the way you move. You always listen before you speak." He nodded once. "Afghanistan. Infantry." She looked down. "My brother went. Didn't come back right." Ransom sat on the edge of the nearby chair. "I know the kind. For a while there was only the creak of the stove and the soft moan of wind outside." Then she said, "You think you know what a man's capable of. Then one day you don't." Ransom didn't ask who she meant. He knew. You didn't run that far unless someone who swore to protect you turned into something else entirely. "Is he looking for you?" She blinked, slow and unsure. "Probably. You don't owe me the story." Her lips pressed into a hard line. "I left in the night. Took what I could. I think I heard him yelling after me, but I didn't stop. I just ran. A man picked me up on the road. Took me as far as Broken Elm, then his truck died. I walked the last 10 miles, bleedin'." She nodded. That was how she'd reached his porch, wild-eyed and limping, collapsing just inside the door. "You saved my life," she whispered. I don't even know your name. Ransom Cade. Why did you help me? He hesitated. Then, because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. She tilted her head. You think I don't deserve it? I think you don't believe you do. The fire cracked between them, the only applause in that quiet revelation. That night he heard her scream. He was out of bed before his boots hit the floor, storming down the hall to find her curled up under the kitchen table, shaking and sobbing, the quilt tangled around her legs. He didn't touch her, just knelt beside her and said her name. It's just a dream, he said gently. You're still here. You're safe. No one ever came before she choked. I ain't no one. She crawled into his arms, then not like a lover, but like a drowning soul reaching for solid ground. And he let her. In the barn, the wind howled like something wounded. Coy stood in the doorway watching the ranch house with wary eyes. Storm's comin', he muttered. Inside, Ransom held the girl close and whispered, Let it come. The fire cast their shadows long against the wall, and across the valley, headlights cut through the dark, rolling slowly down the old timber road. You're safe here, he had told her, but some devils don't knock when they return. The knock came just after dawn, 3 quick raps against the wood, too measured for a neighbor, too early for good news. Ransom reached the door before the girl stirred from the cot beside the stove. His hand hovered near the rifle leaned against the wall, and he pulled the door open just enough to see who stood on his porch. A man in a dark oilskin coat hat, pulled low over pale eyes. Lean tall with a scar that carved across his cheek, like lightning over desert rock. I'm looking for someone, the man said, his voice slick and practiced. Plenty of people out here? Ransom replied, not opening the door farther. The man's lips twitched. Name's Holt. Heard there was a girl came through these parts. Real pretty. Slipped out of town a few days back. Been worried sick about her. From behind Ransom, the soft clink of a tin cup betrayed Tessa's presence. Her breath caught. Ransom didn't look at her, but his stance shifted. Ain't seen no one, he said flatly. Funny, Holt said, leaning slightly. Sheriff in Broken Elm said she might have headed this way. Folks talk. Even out here. I don't take in strays. You sure about that? Ransom's eyes narrowed. You done asking questions. Holt smiled a slow, barbed thing. For now. He stepped off the porch without another word, boots crunching in the frost. A black truck idled just down the path. Ransom watched him drive off, dust rising behind the tires like breath off a wild horse. Only when the taillights vanished did he shut the door. Tessa stood frozen pale, as linen hands gripping the edge of the table. That was him. Ransom nodded once. Figured. I didn't think he'd find me this fast. You left a trail number, but he's good at digging. He always finds things when he wants to. Ransom didn't speak. He walked to the window, peering out over the fields. Coy was coming up from the barn, his shoulders tense even at a distance. Tessa stepped closer, voice small. I should go. You ain't going anywhere. She flinched. If he comes back, he'll come back. Then why let me stay? Because you didn't run this far just to run again. The wind beat against the house as if testing its resolve. Coy pushed open the door without knocking. You see him? He asked. Yeah. That's the one she ran from. Ransom gave a grim nod. Coy scratched his chin. He ain't just looking. He's huntin'. You saw it in his eyes. Tessa sank into the chair, the blanket falling from her shoulders. The bruises were fading, but the fear clung harder than any wound. I should have kept moving, she murmured. Where to? Coy asked. Winter's nearly here. You got no money, no horse, no kin. I don't want anyone getting hurt for me. You're not the one bringing hurt. Ransom said, voice steady. He is. She looked up at him, then really looked like maybe for the first time she saw something besides a safe place to hide. He won't stop. I won't either, she swallowed hard. You need to understand something, Coy added. Men like that, they count on fear. They count on silence. But out here, we don't answer to threats. Tessa blinked back tears. He's not just angry. He's twisted. He made me believe I owed him everything, that no one else would ever want me. Coy nodded slowly. That's a cage made of words. But it ain't iron. She looked between them, bewildered. Why are you helping me? Why do you care? Ransom stepped forward. Because I know what it feels like to crawl out of a place like that, only to find nobody waiting on the other side. His voice dropped low, almost reverent. And because someone once said to me, you don't owe a man your soul just because he kept you hungry. Her lip quivered. I can't pay you back. I ain't asking for that. Coy cleared his throat. But we will teach you how to shoot. Ransom raised an eyebrow. Coy, you said she's staying. Then she better know how to stand. Next time Holt knocks, I want her hand steadier than mine. The girl stared wide-eyed. Come on, Coy said, nodding toward the barn. We'll start with tin cans and work up from there. She followed him slowly, unsure but moving forward. By late afternoon, the sun slipped low behind the ridge, and the snow began to fall again. In the barn, Tessa stood with both arms braced, the rifle trembling in her grip. The first shot rang out wild. The second clipped the fence. The third hit a rusted can dead center. She laughed, soft, startled, and then covered her mouth like it wasn't allowed. Coy grinned. Told you. There's fight in you yet. Back at the house, Ransom watched through the window, arms folded. He knew Holt would come back. Men like him always did. But this time, Tessa wouldn't be the same girl who begged at his door, bloodied and shaking. He turned as the door opened behind him. Tessa stepped in, flushed from the cold hair dusted with snow. You didn't have to do this, she said softly. I know. I don't know what'll happen next. I do. She hesitated. What? He looked her square in the eyes. You'll stand. Outside, Coy hammered fresh boards onto the gate, whistling low. Snow piled against the fence posts. The mountain loomed in the distance, watching over them all. You don't owe a man your soul just because he kept you hungry. And when Holt came again this time, he wouldn't be knocking. The storm moved in like an old grudge, slow at first, then fast and bitter. By nightfall, the wind howled down from the ridge like it meant to peel the roof right off the house. The chimney rattled. The windows groaned in their frames. Coy was out back, checking the stock boots, crunching through a hard crust of snow that had fallen earlier than expected. Inside, the fire snapped loud in the hearth. Tessa sat curled near it, eyes trained on the flames, the rifle within arm's reach. Ransom stood at the table, oiling his own weapon in methodical silence. The kettle hissed in the background, scent of dried sage and pine bark steeping the air. You really think he'll come tonight? She asked. I don't think he left. Tessa glanced at the window. I didn't see headlights. Ransom looked up slow and steady. Men like Holt don't bring headlights. They bring ghosts. The wind tore at the eaves again, and the lantern swung in its bracket, casting shadows that danced like memory on the wall. She pulled the blanket tighter. It's just all this. I'm not used to people fighting for me, or preparing like I'm worth saving. Ransom said nothing at first. Then he wiped his hands on an old cloth and leaned against the table. That's the trick of it. The world makes you believe you gotta earn protection, like you need a reason to be safe. She met his eyes. And you don't believe that, no ma'am, he said. I believe breathing's reason enough. They sat in silence after that, listening to the stove hum and the wind drag itself across the fields. The clock ticked loud in the hush. A few minutes later, the door creaked, and Coy stepped in, stomping off snow. Gates still up. Horses spooked but holding, he muttered. But I saw something down by the west fence. Ransom straightened. What kind of something, Shadow? Maybe a man. Maybe not. But he wasn't moving like he was out for a stroll. Tessa stood. Her hands shook, but her back was straight. We ready? Coy asked. As we'll ever be, Ransom said, taking the rifle in hand. They doused the lamps, let the house fall into shadow. The fire dimmed low embers, red like watchful eyes. Ransom moved to the front door, cracked it just wide enough to see through. Moonlight glazed the snow, turning every drift into a whisper. And then from the tree-line movement, slow, deliberate. Tessa stepped beside him. It's him, she whispered. Ransom didn't nod. He didn't breathe. Holt moved through the trees like he owned the dark. Not rushing, not worried. He wore that same oilskin coat now dusted in frost, and his hands were empty, but his posture screamed danger. Ransom turned to Coy. Back door boarded from earlier. If he's coming through the front. Tessa took a breath, then let him. Ransom looked at her. You sure? She nodded. If I keep running, I'll always be looking over my shoulder. I want to look him in the eye. Just once. Ransom handed her the smaller rifle. She took it with trembling hands, but her grip was firm. Coy posted near the window, peering through a slit in the curtain. They waited and waited. Then 3 sharp knocks, just like the first time. Ransom opened the door, slow and steady. Holt stood on the porch, eyes gleaming like polished stone. Evening, he said, like he was dropping by for coffee. No use pretending, Ransom said. No use, Holt agreed. She here, Tessa stepped into view, the rifle tucked under her arm. I'm here. He smirked. Well, you clean up nice, I'm not going with you. He tilted his head. You sure might not be your choice. You got no law behind you, Ransom said, voice low. I don't need law, Holt replied. I got history. She and I got understanding. Tessa's voice was quiet, but it cut like frost. You don't own me, his smile faltered. You really believe that I do now? Coy stepped into view behind her shotgun, aimed low but ready. I think you'd best leave, mister. Holt looked at the 3 of them. A cripple, a coward, and a girl with scars. Ransom stepped onto the porch. Maybe. But we ain't scared. You should be. Holt reached fast, too fast, but Tessa had already raised the rifle. The shot rang out before Ransom could blink. Holt stumbled, hand clutching his side, blood soaking through the coat. He looked at her in disbelief. You. She took a step forward. I'm not yours anymore. I never was. He dropped to one knee, still breathing, but the fire in his eyes had dulled. Coy came out and kicked the gun Holt had dropped. You'll live. But you'll remember this pain every time you try to raise your voice or your hand again. Ransom looked to Tessa. She was shaking, but she didn't cry. Her face was pale and her breath came in sharp bursts, but she stood and stood. Ransom rested a hand on her shoulder. You done good, she swallowed. I thought I'd feel relief, but all I feel is tired. You've been carrying the weight alone, he said. Now we'll carry it with you. They tied Holt's hands, radioed for the sheriff over Coy's old ham set. An hour later, the lights from the law rolled up the snowy path. Holt was loaded into the back of the cruiser, still clutching his side, still glaring. But something in him had shifted. He wasn't the storm anymore. The sky cleared by morning sharp stars, giving way to rose-colored light. The house smelled of coffee and ash and snow-wet clothes. Tessa stood on the porch, wrapped in an old blanket, steam curling from her cup. Ransom came out beside her, hat pulled low. "You okay?" She nodded. "I think so." "You ever scared again?" he said. "You remember tonight." She looked out toward the fence line where Holt had fallen. "You don't have to run to be strong. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay." She nodded once, and then she stayed. A man can be taught to mend fences, but it takes a different kind of strength to mend a woman's heart. The August sun hovered low, casting long amber shadows over the paddocks as Jeb secured the final wooden slat into the new fence line. His shirt clung to his back, soaked in honest sweat, but he didn't stop until the final nail echoed its last metallic thud. Standing upright, he rolled his shoulders and glanced toward the distant ridge where the creek whispered and the cottonwoods swayed. The land was healing one piece at a time. So was he. Maybe. From the porch of the main house, Maddie watched him. She stood barefoot, hair half-pinned, apron flecked with flour. The smell of baked peaches drifted from the open windows, and the breeze carried the scent down to where Jeb worked. He paused, catching it, smiling faintly. It reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen, of a time before loss became his morning companion. Inside the house, Olive sat with her boots off, stitching the last hem of a small quilt she'd been working on for Sadie. Sadie, now moving with less limp, was sorting books by the hearth, humming softly. The light in her had grown steadier these days. Her shoulders weren't as curled. Her laugh didn't sound borrowed anymore. That morning, Jeb had found her at the barn, running her hand along the grain of the stall door, whispering to the mare Midnight. She didn't flinch when he approached. Instead, she turned and said plainly, "She's got old scars, too. Doesn't mean she ain't strong." Jeb didn't speak right away. He simply handed her a brush, and the two of them had groomed the mare in silence that wasn't heavy anymore. It was companionable, but still the distance between them felt like a stretch of dry land waiting for rain. Back on the porch, Maddie called out supper in 10 boys. "And wipe those boots or I'll swat you both." Jeb chuckled, nodding toward Levi, who'd just come back from the south pasture with a coil of wire slung over his shoulder. "You heard the boss lady?" Levi smirked. "Better not cross her. She's got that mother bear look." They climbed the porch steps, boots thudding the wood in unison. Inside, laughter bloomed. Olive teasing Jeb about his hair sticking out in all directions, Maddie swatting Levi with a dish towel. Sadie set the table, careful with the silverware fingers, steady, a far cry from the girl who once trembled at the clatter of a plate. Over dinner, stories flowed. Maddie told tales of town gossip, how Mrs. Pritchard's prized rooster had gone missing again. Levi spun a yarn about nearly stepping on a rattler. Olive rolled her eyes. But it was Sadie's story that quieted the room. "I had a dream," she said, her voice light but firm. "I was running through a field of wheat, and there was no blood, no pain, just wind and golden light. I think I was laughing." Silence settled for a heartbeat, sacred and full. Jeb cleared his throat. "You've earned that kind of dream." She smiled at him, not a guarded flicker, but a real one, the kind that hinted at trust. After dinner, as the others tidied up, Jeb lingered on the porch steps, a mug of coffee warming his palms. Sadie joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "I remember that first night," she said, eyes on the stars. "Bleeding and barely able to breathe. I thought you were going to send me away." "I was close to it," he admitted. "I didn't know if I could carry someone else's hurt. I didn't know if I'd collapse under it." "But you didn't." "No," he said. Turns out mending things isn't always about the land. Sometimes it's the people on it. She looked at him, then really looked. And sometimes it's about letting people mend you too. He opened his mouth, but words tangled behind his teeth. Before he could sort them out, Olive stepped out with a basket. "Sadie, I've got some lavender you might want for your room." "Coming," she said, rising. Jeb watched her go, heart thrumming with something he couldn't yet name. Hope, maybe, or fear disguised as hope. Later that night, thunder rolled low across the prairie. A storm was gathering. Jeb couldn't sleep. He wandered into the barn, flashlight in hand, checking on the animals. Midnight nickered softly. He paused beside her stall, brushing her nose gently. The mare leaned into him. "You and me, girl," he murmured. "We know how to carry hurt." Behind him, the barn door creaked. He turned, expecting Levi or Maddie, but it was Sadie, barefoot, shawl wrapped tight, face pale in the lightning flashes. "I couldn't sleep either," she said. "Storms still make me jumpy." He nodded, stepping aside so she could reach the mare. They stood side by side, listening to the wind rattle the roof. "You think storms always bring damage?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said, "but sometimes they clean the dust off everything." She closed her eyes, then let it rain. And when it did, when the sky cracked open and the roof trembled, they stayed there, leaning against the old stall gate, shoulder to shoulder, the storm inside them slowly matching the storm outside. The kind of night that doesn't fix everything, but starts to. And outside, beyond the barn, the wind scattered dust and memory alike, making room for something new to grow. Sometimes the only way to build trust is to hand someone the pieces of your broken past and pray they don't run. The rain had soaked the earth clean, leaving the morning quiet and soft. Mist curled along the hills, like breath held between prayers. On the porch, Sadie sat wrapped in her quilt, her fingers tracing the stitching Olive had taught her. She watched as steam drifted from her mug, the scent of chicory and firewood lingering in the air. Everything was damp and still except her heart, which now beat with a fragile rhythm that was no longer survival. It was something else, maybe beginning. Inside, Levi cursed as he dropped a boot. "Mornin' comes too quick on stormy nights," he grumbled. Jeb chuckled from the sink where he was scrubbing a pan. "You mean late nights talking in the barn wear you out?" "I wasn't the one whisperin' with a lady half the night," Levi teased, flicking water toward him. Jeb didn't reply. His gaze drifted to the window where Sadie's silhouette was etched in the light like a story he hadn't finished reading. After breakfast, Sadie helped Maddie clean the pantry shelves. They worked quietly, the rhythm of moving jars and wiping wood calming Sadie's hands. At one point, Maddie turned to her and asked gently, "How'd you learn to be so careful with everything?" Sadie paused, fingers still on a jar of canned peaches. "When everything in your world can break in a moment, you learn to handle things like they're glass." Maddie didn't speak, just reached over and squeezed her hand. Outside, Olive led a new calf toward the shed, cooing to it. She waved to Sadie as she passed. "When you finish, come help me name this stubborn boy." Sadie smiled, faintly nodded. It was strange being wanted, being useful for more than just surviving. Later that afternoon, Jeb hitched the wagon and called to her, "Ride into town with me." She hesitated, her fingers curled around the edge of the porch rail. She hadn't been into town since that night, not since the alley, the blood, the shouting, the man with the cigarette breath who grabbed her hair like rope. Jeb noticed her stillness. "You don't have to. Just thought you might want to pick some things yourself. You mentioned needing thread." She looked at him, then at the horses, then finally nodded. "Okay." The ride started quiet. The road was muddy but passable. Trees shimmered with droplets, and the air held the clean scent of pine. Sadie sat with her hands in her lap, eyes on the road ahead. Used to be, she said softly. I'd see a wagon like this and wish I could trade places with whoever sat in it. Thought they must have peace. Jeb tilted his hat back, watching her carefully. And now I still wish for peace. But maybe not someone else's. They reached town as the sun pressed through thinning clouds. The general store smelled of sawdust and cinnamon. Sadie stepped in cautiously, eyes scanning every face. No one looked twice. No one whispered. Mr. Tomlinson greeted her with a smile and called her ma'am. She almost cried at the sound. While Jeb loaded feed, she picked out thread, some cloth, a new tin of salve Olive had asked for. But it was the small, leather-bound book in the corner that made her pause. Blank pages. A journal. She picked it up, tracing the edge. You thinking of writing? Jeb asked, coming up behind her. She hesitated. I used to before. He waited. I wrote poems, she said at last. Silly ones. Love ones. Sometimes ones that hurt so much I'd tear out the page. Nothing silly about telling the truth, he said. Even if it's in rhyme. She bought the journal. On the way back, they passed the old chapel with the wooden bell tower. Its doors were open, the wind pushing one slightly ajar. Sadie spoke without turning her head. He took me there once. Said no one would hear me scream behind those walls. Jeb pulled the reins, gently slowing the horses. She kept going. I never thought I'd say that out loud. He didn't interrupt. I thought if I said it, it'd make it real again. But it's already real. What's different now is that it's behind me. She looked at him, tears clinging to her lashes. I want to tell you everything, but I don't know if I can. Not all at once. You don't have to, he said, voice rough. You just have to know I'll stay. She nodded. That's the part I've never known. By the time they returned, dusk had drawn its curtain across the sky. Lanterns glowed on the porch. Olive waved them in. Supper was waiting. Sadie helped Maddie serve, even laughed when Levi spilled molasses on his shirt. After dinner, she slipped away to her room, sat on her bed, and opened the journal. The first words trembled from her pen like a prayer. I'm still afraid, but less so when I speak. She closed it gently. Out by the barn, Jeb leaned against the fence, arms folded, watching the horizon darken. Levi joined him. She's opening up, Levi said. Yeah. You ready for what comes with that? Jeb nodded slowly. She's handing me pieces. I just don't want to be the kind of man who drops them. The wind picked up again, rustling the wheat. Inside, Sadie lit a candle by her bed and stared at the flame. She thought of the chapel, of silence, of journals, of hands that never raised in anger. She pressed her palm to the quilt Olive had finished that morning. It was patched with colors she had chosen herself. Tomorrow she decided she would ask Jeb something bold. Not about love, not yet, but something that had once been hers and had been stolen. Her name, her worth, her voice. The storm had passed, but the rebuilding that was just beginning. Healing isn't always gentle. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing barefoot on the ashes of what tried to ruin her, whispering, I'm still here. The barn door creaked open with the hush of morning still clinging to the land. Mist rose in gentle fingers from the troughs and fences, and dew clung to every blade of grass like 1,000 whispered blessings. Sadie stood at the threshold barefoot, her toes curling into the cool dirt. She hadn't meant to wake this early, but her dreams had stirred her, half memory, half warning, like a flicker of old fear trying to pull her backward. She didn't let it. Instead, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the light. The world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't collapsed, and neither had she. Jeb was already out by the corral mending a loose board. He paused when he saw her giving her that quiet nod of acknowledgement that didn't press, didn't assume. Just noticed. "Morning," she said, voice hoarse. He tilted his head. "You all right?" She nodded. Didn't want to sleep anymore. Thought I'd try standing in the morning for once instead of hiding from it. His hammer stilled. He studied her for a long breath before offering "Want to walk the fields with me?" "Won't talk unless you do." She gave a small smile. "That sounds just right." They walked the long edge of the pasture where the fence met the rise of wild brush. The sky blushed pink, then gold, then soft blue as the sun rose behind them. Sadie listened to the rhythm of their steps, the wind rattling the tall grass, the soft whinny of a colt waking in the distance. "I wrote last night," she said, breaking the silence. Jeb looked over. In the journal, just a few lines. Good lines. They were scared lines, but true. Truth's worth more than fancy. She nodded and stopped by a cedar post. Her fingers slid over the rough bark. "I want to show you something, or tell you something." Jeb leaned against the fence post beside her, waiting. "There was a night," she began slowly, "when I tried to leave him. Packed my things, hid money behind a loose board and the floor money I'd stitched into the hem of my coat. I waited until he was gone, but he came back early. Found the coat. Ripped it off me. Took the money and threw me into the fireplace grate. Burned my side so bad I couldn't breathe." Jeb's jaw tensed, but he didn't interrupt. "After that, I stopped trying to leave. Started trying to disappear. I thought maybe if I became small enough, quiet enough, I wouldn't be worth hurting." She turned to him now, her eyes gleaming in the new light. "But it didn't save me. And it didn't break me either. I was bruised, burned, starving. But somehow even then something inside me whispered, 'You're still here.'" She lifted the hem of her blouse slightly and showed him the long, silvery scar along her ribcage. "I'm tired of hiding what he did to me. Because if I hide it, then I carry the shame like it belongs to me." Jeb stared at the scar, then looked back into her face. He should be behind bars. He vanished before anyone could find him. And honestly, I stopped chasing justice a long time ago. I just want to heal. Jeb stepped back and gently reached for her hand. "You already are. Just by telling it. Just by standing." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Back at the house, Olive was baking cornbread and fussing at Maddie for trying to open the oven too soon. Levi whistled while brushing the horses, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen, like he was hoping something would land on a plate for him. Sadie slipped upstairs to fetch her journal. She paused in her room, staring at the small dresser, one she had never opened, since Olive had given it to her. Something tugged at her then. She opened the bottom drawer. Inside were 3 folded handkerchiefs, a comb, and a small envelope. Her breath caught when she saw the handwriting. Her own. From a letter she'd written long ago but never mailed. She'd tucked it inside her coat the night she tried to run. She opened it now. "If you find this, I'm gone. I couldn't stay. If I live, it will be because I left. If I don't, it's because no one listened. I loved once, but love shouldn't hurt. If I get a second chance, I'll never go back." Sadie folded it back with trembling fingers. She didn't cry. She just sat still for a moment, then lit the small oil lamp on the table, took the letter outside, and walked behind the barn where the fire pit sat cold. She struck a match, held it to the paper, and let it burn. Jeb found her sitting there afterward, the wind tugging at her shawl. "Let something go," he asked. "No," she said softly. "I claimed something." She stood barefoot in the dirt soot at her feet, ash blowing into the morning light. Later that evening, Jeb brought a gift to her porch, a small wooden box. Inside it was a brooch in the shape of a dove carved from antler bone, smooth and warm to the touch. "Why a dove?" she asked. He looked at her. "Because you kept flying, even when they tried to cage you." She wore it that night to supper. Maddie complimented it. Olive squeezed her hand. Levi tried to pretend he didn't notice and failed miserably. That night she wrote again. "Healing isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's standing in the dirt where you once bled and saying, 'I'm not broken anymore.'" She closed the journal and lay down. No nightmares came. Only the soft, rustling sound of the wind through the trees like a lullaby written just for her. The ones who say you can't are often the same ones afraid you will. Let them watch. The first frost of the season glazed the pasture in a thin silver veil, and the ranch woke under breath that lingered in the cold morning air. Sadie stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a chipped blue mug, steam curling past her cheekbones. The world outside looked quiet, but inside her something had shifted. Not everything had healed, but enough had changed that she could feel the difference in her spine, straighter, steadier. Her shadow no longer flinched. Down by the barn, Olive and Maddie were laughing real belly-deep laughter that carried all the way up the hill. Jeb had taken to letting them help mend fences, claiming they had natural talent with hammers. Sadie knew it was more about giving them something they could claim as theirs. That mattered. Levi wandered into the kitchen behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Cornbread smells like you made it," he muttered. She smirked. "Because I did." He looked at her with his crooked grin. "Guess that means I should say thank you before I eat it this time." "You'd be the first," she teased, handing him a plate. While he scarfed it down, she tied on her shawl and stepped out onto the porch. The land stretched wide and brave around her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe she fit inside it. Like maybe she wasn't just surviving here. Maybe she was becoming part of it. Mid-morning brought a knock at the front gate, hard, deliberate, and out of rhythm with the usual soft cadence of neighbors or delivery folk. Jeb, who'd just come in from splitting wood, froze halfway across the yard. Sadie was already heading for the porch, her boots echoing on the planks. At the gate stood a man she hadn't seen in years, but would have known in the dark. Colt Granger. He wore that same slick smile, but age had etched deeper lines around his mouth, and his eyes had a dull gleam like rust on a blade. He leaned on the post, like he owned the place, like no time had passed. "Well," he drawled, "look who's gone and made herself at home." Sadie didn't move. She didn't flinch, but her breath came tighter, pressed between her ribs like it remembered everything he ever did to her. Jeb stepped up beside her, quiet as snowfall. Colt's gaze flicked to him and then back to her. "Didn't think you'd end up on a place like this. Looks too clean for you." Sadie's voice was low and even. "What do you want, Colt? I came for what's mine. You own nothing here. I ain't talking about land." Jeb moved forward, his hand instinctively resting near his belt, where his knife usually hung when riding the fence lines. "You need to leave." But Colt laughed. "I'm not scared of men who hide behind women." Sadie didn't wait for Jeb to speak again. She stepped down from the porch. "You think you still scare me that I'll fold just 'cause you showed up with that same greasy smile and dead eyes?" Colt's jaw twitched. "You forget who I am. I remember exactly who you are, and so does the scar on my side." She took another step closer. The wind caught her shawl, fluttering it like a banner. "But here's what's different," she said, voice steady. This land doesn't bend for you. These people don't answer to you. And I, she pointed to her chest, don't belong to you. Colt sneered. You think they'll keep you safe? This some kind of sanctuary. Jeb's voice came low but sharp behind her. It is now. Colt spat in the dirt and turned to leave. We'll see about that. Sadie didn't watch him walk away. She turned and went back inside, hands shaking only slightly. Inside the kitchen, Maddie and Olive sat silent, eyes wide. Who was that man? Maddie asked, voice small. Sadie didn't lie. He's the reason we left. The girl's face darkened, her little jaw set with more strength than a child should have to hold. He doesn't get to come here again. No, baby, Sadie said, kneeling beside her. He doesn't. Later that afternoon, Jeb found her sitting behind the barn, whittling a piece of cedar. He didn't say much, just sat beside her and handed her a water canteen. I didn't expect him to show, she finally said. I did, Jeb admitted. Men like that don't let go easy, especially when the thing they lost has the nerve to start shining. She stared ahead, fingers still on the carving. He used to say no one would want me, that if I ever tried to leave, I'd come crawling back. Jeb turned to face her. The ones who say you can't are often the same ones afraid you will. Sadie looked up at him. Let them watch, he said simply. She smiled, slow, hard-earned, then turned the cedar carving over in her hand. It was a small horse, not perfect but honest. That night she placed it on the mantel beside the journal and the bone-carved dove. Little symbols of quiet wars, one. She wrote again before bed. They said I couldn't make it without him, that I was too broken to stand. But I am standing. And I hope he watches every damn step I take. The frost came heavier that night, painting the windows white and still. But inside the fire burned warm and steady. You don't owe anyone the story of how you survived. But if you do tell, it makes sure it ends with you standing taller than they remember. Sadie awoke before dawn, her breath clouding in the cold bedroom air. Outside the ranch lay buried under a veil of frost, every branch outlined in white. She slipped from bed, her bare feet touching the wooden floor like a prayer, and made her way to the kitchen. The house creaked with old age and memory, but not fear. Not anymore. She moved quietly, lighting the stove, watching the flicker of blue gas ignite beneath the kettle. The girls would sleep a while longer, but she needed a moment, just one, to gather herself before the day. Yesterday, Colt had returned like a ghost, trying to reclaim a body that no longer belonged to him. She'd stood her ground, but the tremble hadn't left her bones entirely. Not yet. There were some hauntings that didn't end with a slammed door or a shouted name. The back door opened and closed with a familiar thump. Jeb came in, dusting snow from his shoulders. Livestock's quiet, too cold for even trouble to stir. Sadie poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one over. He took it without a word, nodding in thanks. They stood in silence, watching the sky change. Jeb broke it first. You did good yesterday. I didn't feel brave. You don't have to feel it. You just have to be it. And you were. She leaned against the counter. He's not done. I know it. No. He ain't. Men like that don't like being told no. They come back because they think time makes you forget. Her eyes flicked up. But I haven't forgotten. No, he said gently. You've just grown stronger around it. They drank in silence after that. And when the girls woke, life continued: chores, breakfast, schoolwork. Sadie taught Olive how to thread a needle without tangling it. Maddie read aloud from a book about prairie birds, stumbling over the word ornithologist and giggling every time she tried again. But inside Sadie's mind, something kept tugging a loose thread. Her survival had always been stitched tight, silent. She'd never told the whole story, not to anyone. Midday came and she stood in the barn, running her fingers down the mane of a restless mare. Levi leaned on the stall nearby, chewing on a piece of straw, watching her. "You're quiet today," he said, thinking. "You do that a lot." She smiled faintly. "Too much, maybe." He tilted his head. "You ever gonna tell us what really happened back then?" She didn't answer at first. She ran her hand down the horse's neck, feeling the tension there, the same kind that lived in her own shoulders. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently. "Just, sometimes stories need telling, even if only once." Her eyes met his. "You don't owe anyone the story of how you survived. But if you do tell it, make sure it ends with you standing taller than they remember." Levi blinked, caught off guard by the weight in her voice. Sadie looked back at the mare. "I used to think surviving meant staying quiet, lying low. But now I think maybe survival's got a sound. Maybe it's a voice you finally stop hiding behind silence." She exhaled slowly. Colt wasn't just cruel. He was methodical. He chipped away at me until I didn't know my own name without his say-so. I spent 3 years sleeping with shoes on, just in case. Levi didn't interrupt. He just listened. One night he broke my arm because I spoke to a neighbor too long. Told me if I ever smiled like that again, he'd knock the rest of the light out of me. So I stopped smiling. Stopped hoping. She stepped out of the stall, her voice even but hollow. I had to save money in secret cash tucked inside the seams of an old coat. Took me 5 months to collect enough for 2 bus tickets. When I finally ran, I didn't look back. Levi's brow furrowed. "Why tell me now?" Sadie met his gaze firm. "Because yesterday, I didn't flinch. And that matters." He nodded slowly, swallowing whatever words sat behind his teeth. In the days that followed, the cold deepened. Snow arrived in flurries, soft as breath, clinging to the window panes and silencing the world. Sadie found herself writing again, longer now, clearer. She didn't just write to remember, she wrote to declare. "They tried to bury me in silence, but my voice is louder now. It carries across snow and open fields. It does not ask permission." She didn't read the entries aloud, but she left her journal open on the mantel when she wasn't writing. One evening, Olive crept up beside it, carefully reading a line or two before turning and resting her head on Sadie's knee. "You're brave," she whispered. Sadie brushed the girl's hair back. "So are you." Later that week, while fixing the south fence, Jeb found a torn paper stuffed between the slats, worn rain-splotched, and marked with Colt's handwriting. "You talk too much." Jeb folded it carefully, brought it straight to Sadie. She read it, then burned it in the stove without saying a word. "I'll take extra watch tonight," Jeb offered. She nodded, but her hands didn't shake. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Sadie wrapped herself in a quilt and stood outside watching the moonrise. Levi joined her, handing over a tin cup of warm cider. "You told your story," he said. She nodded. "Part of it." And him, her eyes hardened. He doesn't get to write the ending. Far across the field, a dark shape lingered at the edge of the woods, watching. Sadie didn't move. Neither did Jeb, who stepped silently onto the porch rifle across his back. Sadie spoke calm as still water. "He wants me to be scared again. Wants me to unravel." Jeb narrowed his eyes. "You ain't." "No, I'm not." The figure lingered a beat longer, then disappeared into the trees. Sadie looked up at the stars. He's trying to pull the old Sadie back out, but she's not here anymore. In her hand, her fingers closed around the cedar carving Jeb had given her, and she knew. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was preparing. Certainly. Here's Chapter 12 with the main quote from the outline, integrated continuity from Chapter 11 and connection to what follows, all woven into a vivid and immersive Western storytelling style per your established structure. When a man sets his name beside yours, let the world see the kind of heart he carries to earn that right. The first frost hadn't yet kissed the ground, but the air in the high desert of southern Utah carried the kind of stillness that made a woman feel like something was about to change. Joetta stood beneath the old cottonwood tree just outside the ranch house, arms crossed, a faded red shawl wrapped tightly over her shoulders. She was watching the horizon, but not for weather. She was watching for Henry. There were cattle to be driven east, and word had come in from Elmo that the buyers were a day early. Most men would have fretted, rushed the herd, cut corners, but not Henry Holt. He was still out there with Ellis, his voice the kind that steadied a beast just by speaking. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the girls, Bethy, Pearl, and Annie, were peeling apples with Ruth for drying. They were safe. And not just safe, Joetta realized. Happy. Even little Annie had started to hum again, some off-key version of a hymn Joetta barely remembered from her own mama's lips. She turned just as a wagon rolled up the path, flanked by two men on horseback. Her heart skipped. It wasn't Henry. The man who stepped down wore a brown suit too fine for the red earth. His mustache was trimmed and stiff as his manner. The one on horseback bore the badge of a federal man. Joetta's fingers dug into the fabric of her shawl. "Can I help you, sirs?" The suited man tipped his hat politely. "Mrs. Joetta Langley." She flinched at the name. "That's not my name anymore." "I see." He cleared his throat. "I'm Marshal Edgar Bryson, and this is Agent Howell. We're here on behalf of a probate matter involving the estate of your late father, Russell Langley." Joetta stiffened. "My father's estate was settled. My brother took it all." Bryson exchanged a glance with Howell, then stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, there's reason to believe your brother may have tampered with documents during the initial probate filing. A witness has come forward. If that's proven, you'd be the rightful heir." Joetta's breath caught like a fishhook in her throat. "I don't want the land," she said quietly. "It's more than land," Bryson said. "It includes mineral rights and ownership of several properties leased to the county." She shook her head. "That family, they threw me out like a stray mutt. I don't need a thing from them." Howell dismounted and came up beside them. "It's not just about money, ma'am. It's about clearing your name. Your brother told the court you were unstable, that you ran off with a hired man and abandoned your responsibilities." Joetta's jaw tightened. "He said what?" "Yes, ma'am. It's in the deposition." Rage boiled under her skin, not the kind that made a scene, but the kind that settled deep like coals waiting for a gust. She glanced toward the barn. Henry was just coming up over the ridge, leading the herd home with Ellis. "I need to talk to someone before I decide." Bryson nodded. "We'll be in town through the week." They tipped their hats and left. Dust trailed behind their wheels like a veil being dragged across the dry earth. Henry didn't ask what was wrong until supper. He always knew when to wait and when not to. The kids were tucked in. The lantern flickered on the table between them. Joetta held a mug of chamomile untouched. "Talk to me, Joe," Henry said softly. She looked up at him, her eyes stormy. "They came from the government. Said my brother lied. Said I'm the rightful heir." He stayed quiet. Let the wind move through the silence like it did through the grass. "They want me to come forward, take what's mine. But it feels like walking back into a house that already burned down." Henry leaned forward. "You're not that girl anymore, Joe." She swallowed. "But I still carry her pain." He reached across the table, rough palm warm over hers. Then let it carry you to justice, not bitterness. Her eyes welled. I ain't out for revenge. No, he said. But maybe you're out for the truth. She turned her palm up, lacing her fingers in his. Would you come with me? I'll walk through fire if that's what it takes to see you free. The next morning, Joetta packed a small bag. Ruth handed her a folded shawl, one stitched by Joetta's mother long before the rot had set in the family. Don't let their poison decide your story, Ruth whispered. Joetta squeezed her friend's hand. I won't. Before mounting the wagon Henry had hitched, she crouched beside Bethy, who hugged her knees on the porch. You'll be back? The little girl asked. Joetta brushed a curl from her cheek. I'll always come back. This is home. Bethy smiled, but her lip trembled. Joetta stood and faced Henry, who handed her up. As the wagon rattled down the lane, the wind kicked up a handful of dust and wild sage. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her heart was tethered to that ranch now, and it wouldn't break loose, not even under the weight of bloodline and bitterness. When they reached the county building in Elmo Bryson, and Howell met them at the steps, papers were drawn, testimonies gathered. Henry waited outside, chewing on a blade of grass, eyes fixed on the town's single clock tower, like it was measuring more than time. Inside, Joetta faced the judge, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel. She listened, she read, and she ruled. Joetta Langley was the sole rightful heir. Henry stepped in when it was done, and Joetta's voice shook as she whispered, What am I supposed to do with all this? He looked at her, quiet and steady. When a man sets his name beside yours, he said, let the world see the kind of heart he carries to earn that right. She looked up at him, tears caught in her lashes. I'd give it all back, she said, if it meant I could just keep this one life I have with you. He touched her cheek, smile tugging just at the corners. Maybe, darling, you don't have to choose. And just like that, the past didn't vanish, but it didn't own her anymore either. Ahead of them stretched a road lined with winter cottonwoods, bare and beautiful, and somewhere down it, a place where truth, love, and justice would meet at the same table. The educational lesson learned from this story is that strength doesn't always arrive with noise or fury. Sometimes it comes quietly, the moment a person decides to stop running and stand where they are. Healing is rarely quick, but it becomes possible when truth is spoken, dignity is reclaimed, and the past is no longer allowed to write the future. It reminds us that real love is patient and respectful, offering protection without control and support without ownership. And perhaps most importantly, it shows that it is never too late in life to choose peace, rebuild trust, and claim the life that was always meant to be yours.